I never thought I would survive the crash of Seraphist 4. It was an old-generation research vessel, powered by a low-tier biocore, dispatched to investigate unstable enzyme formations within the dust belt of Serath 2. A nameless planet, absent from detailed maps, existing only as a vague smear in the Union's database. The moment we entered the plasma interference zone, everything seemed to vanish. Signals, orientation, even our belief that we could ever return. But what I remember most clearly isn't the metallic screech of the ship breaking apart, nor the screams of my crew as they were consumed by enzyme-like acid. No, it was the silence that followed. An eerie silence, not of life nor of death, just void. I woke up in the wreckage. Blood pooled in thick patches along the bulging walls of living alloy. My protective suit was shredded, the air filter shattered, and I was nearly choking from the enzyme-saturated atmosphere. This strange enzyme wasn't like any biological strain ever recorded. It clung, it lived, it reacted to thought and movement, as though a nervous system gone mad was trying to find equilibrium. And I, caught in the middle of it all, should have died. But I didn't. I dragged myself outside, my body broken, my mind a haze of shock and unidentified biological tremors. The sky of Serath 2 was a solid gray, almost frozen under drifting layers of suspended enzyme particles, forming a hallucinatory mist. Light pierced through it from an unknown source, neither sun nor atmospheric reflection, but rather a bioluminescent glow, as if the planet itself was shining from deep within. And then I saw her. She didn't walk out from anywhere. She simply was, standing still among the living enzyme forest, completely nude except for a decaying bio-armor that had been eaten away to near transparency. Her skin shimmered with a soft jade hue, as if the enzyme had forged her from some divine biological material. But beauty wasn't the first thing I felt. It was terror. Because around her, the enzyme wasn't floating freely. It was moving with purpose. As if it obeyed her. I watched in disbelief as a six-legged creature crawled too close and immediately liquefied in under a second. Everything within a 10-meter radius disintegrated at the cellular level, forming an invisible death field. Everything, except me. She turned her head. Her eyes, a deep golden hue, didn't glow like plasma lamps. They were dull, like the stagnant water of a long-dead world. That wasn't the gaze of a warrior, nor the stare of an enemy. It was the look of something desperate to live. Then she spoke, not through lips, not through vibration, but directly into my mind, like a whisper rising from long-rotted dreams. You don't dissolve. I struggled to stay calm. My heart thundered. Not from fear, but from some strange thrill winding through every capillary. I swallowed hard, my thoughts spinning with questions I couldn't yet form, and finally managed to utter one truth. I'm from Earth. She stood still. Her body trembled, whether from enzyme turbulence or something else, I couldn't tell. Then she stepped forward. I couldn't move. Not because the enzyme held me, but because I didn't want to retreat. Something deep within me, primitive, instinctive, was whispering that I needed to know who she was. And why? I was still alive. She stopped only a few paces away, close enough for me to hear the enzyme beneath her skin whimpering like the breath of 1,000 unseen life forms. Close enough for me to feel the temperature around her fluctuate, not hot like fire, not cold like ice, but unstable, like a biological field spinning out of control. I need a compatible species, or I will disintegrate. Her voice again, sad, fractured, echoing like a call from some distant abyss. I didn't fully understand, but I knew this much: she was dying, and I was the only one near her who wasn't being torn apart. I raised my hand. She never broke eye contact, no weapons, no armor, no warning, and then she touched me. The moment her fingers brushed my wrist, it felt like lightning coursed through me. But it wasn't pain, it was awakening. As though millions of dormant cells ignited all at once, trembling, calling out to something far and ancient. A gentle wave of pleasure rippled through my body, not from arousal but from my skin, my spine, my deepest neural pathways. I gasped, eyes wide. She trembled too, and around us, the enzyme stilled. "You are compatible. You have an irregular enzyme code, like me." I understood immediately. Mutation. I was the result of a long-forgotten biological experiment, once classified as top secret by the Union. My genetic structure carried a dormant immunity to certain high-reactive enzyme strains. It had always been theoretical, until I met her. She took my wrist with both hands. For the first time, her eyes lit up. Mating is no longer a choice, it is survival. My heart pounded. I couldn't tell if the sensation rising in me was fear or desire. But I knew one thing. I didn't want her to die. Not because of duty, not because of morality, but because I had felt that first touch. And I wanted more. Inside that biological cave, everything felt suspended. No mechanical noise, no artificial light, no signals from the universe outside could reach this place. Only the sound of enzyme dripping from the living ceiling onto the soft, pulsing floor, illuminated by faint glowing specks that shimmered like a breathing vascular system. And the strange warmth radiating from Zyra's body. Not biological heat, but a liquid energy current threading through the air like a silent, looping symphony, stirring something in me that was equal parts unease and invitation. She hid nothing. Naked and unguarded, Zyra sat across from me like some primal creature stripped of all armor and masks. Her body reflected the enzyme light against the living walls of the cave, casting soft, shifting waves of color that made me feel as if I were drifting inside a colossal womb. Not one born of love, but carved from the desperate fight for survival, echoing through every pulse of that unsteady enzyme beat. A luminous stream of enzyme curled along her spine like open veins gliding with her breath, fading, then brightening again every time she looked at me. Zyra didn't speak much, but when she did, every word plunged me deeper into some hidden layer of awareness, where desire and existence had no clear boundary. "My name is Zyra. If we don't unify, I will break apart, and you won't survive the third stage enzyme evolution." That wasn't a threat, it was a raw truth, like death itself. Not meant to intimidate, only to confess. She had reached the edge, and now clutched the last thread of hope, in the shape of me. I could feel my body tremble, not out of fear but anticipation. Everything I once called reason, discipline, control, it was peeling away, layer by layer, like old skin. I wasn't hesitating anymore. I had no defenses left to offer. If she needed me to live, then I needed her, to feel truly alive. Zyra crawled forward. Not like a woman, but like a being who had starved far too long. Every motion she made was smooth, wet, saturated with an instinct too ancient to be imitated. As her body closed the distance, I realized something I hadn't before. Her skin was no longer skin, as I knew it. It was a living biological membrane, layered in sensory enzymes, millions of microscopic filaments vibrating with arousal. They didn't just touch, they tasted emotion, read thoughts, memorized every small ripple of response from me. She climbed onto my lap, her biologic joints flexing with uncanny precision, adjusting not to size but to rhythm. When her lips brushed my neck, I stopped being myself. A cool wave of enzyme pierced my spine, coiling up through my brain, detonating into visions that weren't mine. Screams echoing from enzyme labs, couples of her kind exploding during failed unions, the crushing loneliness she'd endured for centuries beneath this buried world. And between those memories, an emptiness where once she had dreamed of someone, anyone, to call a bondmate. But they were all gone. "You have to let me go deep inside," I gasped, feeling the subtle contraction in my lower belly where Zyra had begun to open, not a human vagina but a shifting enzyme chamber capable of morphing to match the neural structure of its partner. When I entered her, I wasn't just penetrating her body, I was being drawn in to a world I had never known. a soft, warm biomechanical space throbbing with emotional pulses, as though her enzyme core was twisting around my soul, seeking to merge. She moaned, and the sound didn't pass through my ears. It passed through my heart. A cry not of lust but of pain and salvation. Every motion she made flooded enzyme into me, not to destroy, but to absorb. Our memories tangled. Unnameable pleasure surged, and then I dissolved, not physically, but in spirit. My body no longer had boundaries. She gripped me tighter, her core secreting streams of living gel that wrapped around me, guiding me deeper still. My body wasn't just inside her, it was being consumed, both literally and biologically. Her enzyme clung to me, fused with my skin, seeped into my pores, and erased any concept of self. But strangely, I loved it. I held her waist, feeling the wild rhythms of her enzyme veins pounding beneath my palms. She wrapped around me like living armor, soft, wet, and warm as an eternal whisper. Zyra began to move, not fast, not urgently, but with careful precision, like she was tuning each wave of enzyme so I wouldn't collapse from the overload. Every time she sank down on me, a violent current of pleasure lanced through my spine, making me twitch, gasp, bite my lip to stifle any sound. But I couldn't hide it for long. She knew, she felt every tremor, and she gripped me harder. I'm alive because of you. I never knew sex could be this. Not passion, not reproductive instinct, but existence itself. In the moment I released inside her, not semen but millions of mutated human enzymes, I felt Zyra break open, not in flesh, in feeling. She collapsed onto my chest, breathing fast, enzyme tears spilling from her eyes, hot and saline. She whispered, with the dying breath of someone who thought she'd already passed on long ago, "You saved me, and now you are me." After the union, I was no longer myself. Not in the cliched sense of mind-swapping or body possession you find in cheap science fiction, but in a transformation that started deep in my spinal cord, from the very rhythm of my breath, from the subtlest pulse of a circulatory system that no longer fully belonged to a human being. I could hear the enzyme murmuring through me like ancient biological hymns playing with every inhale, as if every cell were whispering in a language humanity had never written down. The need to touch Zyra was no longer about lust. It was survival. Whenever she moved even slightly away from me, my skin turned cold, like I had lost signal. Whenever she turned her head toward me from across the space, without even moving, I could still feel the slight contraction deep within her enzyme core, like a signal calling me home. We didn't speak with words anymore, but through enzyme, transmitted through glances, through the scent of skin, through shared breaths, and the smallest motion of her fingers that seemed insignificant but meant everything. Zyra was stronger now. After our fusion, the fractured enzyme spine down her back had regenerated into a new kind of tissue, threaded with violet-blue iridescence that shimmered with every subtle tremor. Her movements were more fluid, her breath more stable, and most of all, she no longer trembled like before. But I noticed something strange. Her body was more powerful than ever, yet her eyes had changed. They no longer held the cold steel of a forsaken warrior, but a soft haze, as though she had never known what it meant to need someone until she met me. It wasn't a hunger for domination. It was the fear of losing something she never thought she could have. I never thought, "I'd need you like this." The words weren't loud, not sharp, not commanding like before. They were like a fragile note floating in a swelling biological symphony. I pulled her closer, laying my hand on her lower abdomen where the enzyme was most active. The soft flesh beneath my palm wasn't fixed. It contracted and shifted with her every breath, with each pulse of my energy, and in that moment of contact, I felt something greater than pleasure. A biological reaction forming on its own, not from programming, not from Earth's genetic logic. Something new was beginning right there. And I never thought I'd want you this much. Zira leaned forward, resting her forehead against my chest. Her skin radiated heat, not burning, but enfolding me in a warmth that felt like the core of a living sun. She whispered something in a tongue I didn't fully understand, perhaps an ancient Enzari dialect lost to time. But I understood its meaning, because immediately after, she placed her hand over my heart, her enzyme-tipped nails lightly scratching a line down my skin, and the enzyme in my own bloodstream responded instantly. My entire body tensed from the overwhelming urge to merge with her again. Not to heal, but to reach her, fully, completely, uncontrollably. We joined again. This time it wasn't rushed. It wasn't about the instinct to survive. It was about desire, raw, all-consuming, total. I held her thighs, guided her onto me, and felt the slick, warm openness beneath her unfold. Not like before, but deeper, more alive. As though her enzyme had memorized my body and was now welcoming me not as a foreign presence, but as a predetermined match. I slid into her so naturally, so completely, that I no longer knew where I ended, and she began. Every thrust triggered a cascade of regenerative enzyme rippling through her body, making her twitch and moan, her eyes flying open before she collapsed into me like a biological storm without a center. Her cries weren't pain. They were something else entirely, like the first voice of a new species crying out in the dark. She clung to me, biting down on my shoulder, not to harm, but to mark. Or perhaps simply because her body could no longer contain the flood. I felt a wave of distinct enzymes surging into me through our joined core, rushing straight to my brain and detonating in what could only be described as a double climax, physical and biochemical. I nearly collapsed under the weight of it. We drowned in each other, in the wet warmth of enzyme pooling around us, covering the cave floor, while our bodies shook, gasping, helpless, but unwilling to stop, because our flesh no longer held the authority. The enzyme had claimed that right long ago. Each moment of fusion rewrote living code, between human and Enzari, between agony and fulfillment, between extinction and rebirth. And I realized we had unwittingly begun creating a new biological cycle, a loop that no species before us had dared to attempt. Xyra clung to me tighter, enzyme tears streaming down her cheeks onto my face, and amid that euphoric chaos, I heard a heartbeat, one that wasn't mine and wasn't hers. It was the pulse of a new species being born from us. The signal I sent from the living enzyme layer wasn't a distress call. It didn't carry the frequency of lost soldiers hoping for extraction. It was a biological rhythm without direction. An erratic pulse that blended mutated enzyme waveforms with human genetic anomalies. I hadn't sent it with any device. I sent it with my body. And the universe, or more precisely, those who still bore the title of my kind, answered. A Union war fleet, bearing a Tier 9 reconnaissance designation, pierced through the dust belt of Seraph II like a programmed spear. They didn't slow down, didn't scan, didn't negotiate. They honed straight in on our hiding place, Xyra and I, guided solely by the mutated enzyme trails I could no longer suppress. None of them knew what had happened to me. But when they saw Xyra, her body glowing with bioluminescent enzyme, her skin no longer conforming to any human definition of tissue, they didn't ask. They didn't need a reason. They just issued one command: neutralize Omega-level threat. I stepped in front of Xyra the moment the molecular enzyme weapons lit up. And it was in that instant that I realized something I had perhaps always known, but never admitted. I was no longer fully human, no longer a creature caught between two worlds. I had been pulled into Xyra, into the enzyme, into a new biology, and I didn't want to leave it. I didn't wait for the first round to hit. I crouched, pressing my hand into the soft, breathing biological floor beneath me, the same enzyme layer that once devoured my comrades, that had rendered this entire region a death zone. But this time, it didn't consume me. It responded. Zyra had given me control over a portion of her primal enzyme, and when my blood mingled with it, the reaction ignited. A defensive enzyme surge never recorded in any human biological archive. I felt the enzyme tendrils within my hand ignite and race outward through the living root network beneath the soil. Within seconds, the ground trembled like a massive creature waking from slumber, and black strands of enzyme burst from the depths, coiling around the missile platforms that were moments from launching. Pilots screamed over their comms, but no one stopped. A few fired prematurely. That was their final mistake. I launched myself forward, not with brute strength, but with the union of enzyme and instinct. My body propelled into the air on a surge of living bioforce, like a biological cannon shot. I landed atop the command tower of the lead warship, locking eyes with the fear on faces bearing the Union insignia, faces that once called me human. Comrades, brothers in arms. I felt no remorse, not even a flicker. I struck with the reflexes of a creature no longer trained in restraint. Enzyme spikes erupted from my palms, long and sharp like living blades, driving through the armored chest of the nearest officer. His blood sprayed across my face, hot, familiar. But I felt nothing. I was no longer one of them. I killed without hesitation, one by one, wave after wave, with the very enzyme they had once designed to annihilate beings like Zyra. Whenever my hands touched metal, the enzyme hissed to life, spreading like sentient smoke, eating through alloy like acid with a mind. No defense system was fast enough, because I no longer fought like a soldier. I fought like an extension of this planet. When the firestorm ended, when bodies and wreckage littered the crimson ground, I returned to Zyra. She had not fled, had not hidden. She stood there, still, watching me with the eyes of someone who had just lost a part of herself, because she knew I had sacrificed the last shred of humanity in me to protect her. She stepped forward. Her hand trembled, not from instability but from emotion. Zyra took my hand, and for the first time, enzyme spilled from her eyes like real tears. One clear drop landed on the back of my hand, so hot it almost burned through my skin. We no longer belonged to any species, I nodded. I had known it since the moment I first entered her, since I felt the irreversible merge. We only belong to each other. I pulled her close, held her tightly as enzyme-laced wind swirled around the cave painted red with the remnants of battle. Beneath our feet, blood and enzyme mingled, no longer distinguishable between human and alien. And I understood this universe would never accept us. But that no longer mattered. What mattered was that I chose her. And she chose me. We did not flee the human world. We simply withdrew from the definition of what they called proper existence. There was no more need to justify, no more desire to be understood, and certainly no longer any obligation to explain ourselves to beings incapable of feeling what we had become. We simply left. Deep into the primal enzyme core of Seraph II, where all signals vanished, where every known alien biological system became useless, and the laws of physics were mere echoes scratching faintly outside the dense layers of living enzyme. Down there, time had no measure. There was no sun cycle, no light, but neither darkness. Only the shimmer of enzyme, glowing like a liquid substance flowing between dimensions, coating deep hollows, soft tunnels, and living veins that hummed like a hidden choir singing the hymn of a biology older than language itself. And in the center of it, there was us. No longer wearing armor, no longer wearing clothes, no longer holding on to distance or distinction. Zyra was no longer a warrior. I was no longer a man. We wore each other. She draped my body like a living exosuit, and I entered her as if I were returning to the place I was born. Not from a mother's womb, but through a living enzyme that remembered every molecule of my skin, every curve of my emotion, every subtle tremor, only she could read with sensory biology far beyond words. Each time we fused, it no longer resembled sex. It was a rite, a sacred process more profound than any doctrine that had ever existed in human history. We didn't do it for pleasure. We did it to continue existing. Each motion was not to chase orgasm, but to activate enzyme replication, to reshape the cellular structure between two beings, to rewrite the code of life for a new species forming inside Zyra's womb, where her enzyme responded to the human biology in me, creating a life cycle unknown to any other world. We touched, not with hands, but with entire bodies, with every pore, every vertebra. I slid into her as though every particle already knew its path, without friction, without resistance. Inside her, the enzyme was soft as cerebrospinal fluid, warm as a womb, tightening around me with every voiceless whisper. And each time we merged, a wave of enzyme pulsed out from the planetary core, undetectable to any sensor. No broadcast, no radar could catch it. But I knew. Distant beings, living crystals attuned to biological frequencies across galaxies. They heard it, not in radio waves, but in the resonance between life forms. Zyra moaned like a world giving birth, not the sound of instinct, but a song of a species being born. I held her hips tightly, feeling the living enzyme circuits flutter like biological signal flares, wrapping around me, guiding every thrust. Deeper we went, the brighter the enzyme glowed. We didn't speak. We didn't scream. We sank. Into each other. Into enzyme. Into something that, if I had to name it, I could only call the sacred declaration of a species never meant to exist. No one came looking. No one knew how to reach us. And it felt as if the universe itself had stopped caring. I felt my chest beating to two pulses. One my own and the other from something growing inside Zyra. Not a child, not that simple, but a hybrid entity. An enzyme human being capable of surviving without air, without light, without gravity, sustained only by connection. Zyra leaned into me, eyes half closed, lips slightly parted, and for the first time she spoke in human language. Not through enzyme, soft, hesitant, trembling, as if borrowing my voice to say what her entire species had never dared. Love you. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because I was already her, and she was already me. Inside each other, in our blood, in the enzyme-laced semen and living fluids that flowed not through a single body, but through us, like a shared biological circuit. And I knew. I had died. As a human. But I had been reborn. Not as something new, but as one half of her. A being that only exists when we are one. And in her arms, under the radiant enzyme glowing across her skin, in a place where all definitions dissolved into irrelevance, I whispered like a final prayer. We are the species no one dares to define, and we don't need to be understood, because we have found each other.